Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. You might have noticed that lately I have been re-releasing some of my older videos that I either just recorded speaking-wise and didn't have a lot of images, if they were archetype videos or whatever. But some of the older videos that I made when I first started the channel, I'm still pretty proud of, and I think that my audience today would enjoy them quite a bit. But they're older, they're in the backlog of videos. Sometimes the images I used or my knowledge of, making videos was a bit shoddy. I'm going to re-release a three-part series, starting with part one today, that I made back in 2016, and it was really at the beginning of the channel. I think the channel had been around for a while, but this was when I was just starting to actually upload a lot of content. And this was in preparation for the Captain America Civil War film. It hadn't been released yet, but we'd seen a lot of images and we're starting to hear, about it. And at that time, I remember that we also had the Batman v Superman film coming out, and that was pretty silly. For all of us who know Batman and Superman, you can have them conflict a little bit when they first meet. That's not unheard of, certainly. But to have that be the whole deal of their meeting and a whole movie surrounding their fighting each other was really kind of silly to us. But a lot of people who didn't understand mythology or comics kind of thought that held for any film or any story that had superheroes coming to blows with each other or conflicting in any way. So I heard from some circles, oh, it's so silly that now Captain America and Iron Man have to fight. And you might argue that, they shouldn't have done that yet. They should have continued with the Bucky or a story or whatever. But in terms of, is that just a gimmick? It's not a gimmick. From a mythological standpoint, all the way back to the oldest Western culture stories of mythology, we do have stories of our heroes, our mythological heroes, fighting each other. And that meant something. You tended to reflect something that was going on in culture at the time. And that's what I made these videos about. So it's a three-part series, and specifically I'm looking at the Marvel Civil War comic book event. Now, I'm a big fan of that. And I know some people, especially traditional Marvel fans, weren't, and that's fine. But I do think that, for the flaws here and there, I've often cited it as a good example of how to recontextualize some tensions and anxieties that are going on in society at the time, and recontextualize them in a story, a fictional story, a myth, using our mythological heroes in a way that isn't agenda ridden, in a way that isn't trying to preach. It's not propaganda. It's actual mythology reflecting on the times. I think it's a good example of how that's done. So this three-part series, the first part that you're going to watch here today is really about the history of heroes fighting each other in Western mythology, and then how that's reflected with the Marvel Civil War comic as well. And I'll say some things kind of looking forward to the film, which I didn't know yet, but I think the film, in hindsight, the film, even though it was very different from the comic, it still captured this phenomena, this tension, this reason to have our heroes fight and have that reflect certain tensions and anxieties in society really quite well. And it still bears on society today quite a bit here 4 or so years later. So that's the part one. At the end of this video, I do say a line in which I think is a good thing to end on here. I say that stories about our heroes are really stories about ourselves. They're really stories about ourselves. That's the hero's journey, right? We reflect on our own experience in the guise of a story, and we think of ourselves as the main character. That's just how human psychology works. We get out of bed each morning and we enter into the unknown. We're a hero traveling into the cave of the unknown, so to speak. We have experiences that stretch us, frighten us, but shape us, create us into who we're going to be for the rest of our lives, and then we reflect on those experiences, and hero stories are a way to do that. So stories about our heroes either fighting each other or facing different trials and different challenges or whatever. That's us. That's us telling stories about ourselves in a metaphorical way. So that's video one. Video two will then reflect on specifically what tensions were going on in society at the time when the Captain America or Marvel Civil War comic was released, and how that was a good recontextualization of that didn't focus on propaganda and so forth. And then the third part of the series shows how the Civil War event, specifically the comic book, but I think we can also apply that to the Marvel film, how it reflected on the censorship of comics with the Comics Code Authority. So that's a brief introduction. I'll probably put this introduction on the beginning of each video or some semblance thereof. just for people who might be catching it mid series. But I'm going to release these in pretty much successive days or almost there. So that's that. I hope you enjoy the series. The audio is a little different. It's not quite what I have set up now. I'm talking a little lower because I was just learning how to YouTube and whatnot. But hopefully you'll enjoy the content. So thanks for watching, and yeah, till next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the hero stories you love.
Like any universe-wide event, Civil War left some traditional fans disgruntled, but the story tapped into a foundational archetype that expanded the relevance of both the universe and the heroes within. Throughout the history of mythology, our heroes have clashed with one another in stories that define or redefine their purpose. Though ancient stories often held religious significance, and we accept our superheroes as fiction, they both create culture by providing values, fears, and aspirations. From a sociological perspective, religion is the ideal vehicle for culture. Yet modern-day Western societies often lack one unifying religion, so our cultural mythology becomes our popular fiction. Instead of gods saving our souls and saints setting spiritual examples, we have superheroes that save us from danger and embody values we believe in as a culture. Iron Man is industriousness, ingenuousness, and resourcefulness. Captain America is selflessness, compassion, and hope, literally wrapped in an American flag. As we keep those values on the same cultural pedestal in our democratic republic, selflessness with industriousness and so on, tensions arise, political, philosophical, or otherwise, and carry over to our heroes. Whether it's sensationalized accounts of Jefferson versus Hamilton, John Henry versus the Great American Railroad, or Captain America versus Iron Man, our heroes fight to help us work out those tensions. The same principle was at work in mythologies throughout the history of Western culture, as heroes clashed over ideals surprisingly similar in spirit to our own, which indelibly altered the course of their mythologies and cultures as well. Let's start with the oldest surviving great work of mythology, the Epic of Gilgamesh, dating to around 2100 BC. The part god, part man Gilgamesh is a cruel king who oppresses his people. The gods hear the people's cries for help and create Enkidu, a supernaturally powered primitive man, equal to Gilgamesh in strength, but opposite to him in nature. Gilgamesh was born a man of civilization, and has corrupted it with his cruel reign. Enkidu is a wild man living with animals, until he is tamed by degrees. As one learning of civilization from the outside, he sees the injustice of the king's actions and stands in his way. After an epic battle, the two gain a mutual respect and decide to team up to slay monsters and accomplish the deeds that would make them both legendary. Let's fast forward in time to another tentpole of mythological history. The Trojan War is arguably the center point of ancient Greek mythology. In some tellings, Zeus instigated the 10-year war to prune the earth of demigods, the Olympians' offspring with humans, whom it was foretold would be his downfall. The conflict, ultimately over the elopement of Helen, Queen of Sparta, with Paris, Prince of Troy, was fought between the confederation of Greek city-states and the besieged city of Troy. Greece at the time was a mixture of loose civilizations. It ranged from the domain of wily Odysseus to the militarily centered Sparta. In contrast, Troy was the center from which ancient civilization flowed, the hub of arts, craftsmanship, and knowledge. Joining in the conflict, to side with either the Greeks or Trojans, were the aforementioned demigods, legendary warriors, Amazons, and the Olympian gods themselves. So once again we have an epic conflict between ideas of civilization. Should the Queen of Sparta be returned if she was forced to marry her king but fell in love with Paris? And once again, the fight is a turning point, marking the death of many heroes such as Achilles, and determining the heroic destinies of others such as Odysseus and Aeneas. Even the gods themselves change as the resulting events in the house of Atreus lead Athena to confront the Furies, who alter their ways and become Eumenides. Now let's fast forward one last time to English mythology. No two names resonate greater here than King Arthur and Lancelot Dulac. In most tellings, Arthur was already king, ruling the realm in peace with his Knights of the Round Table when Lancelot entered the realm. The Frenchman proved himself as the most valorous of Arthur's knights, and the two forged a close friendship. Lancelot even chose to champion Arthur's queen, Guinevere. When it is later revealed that the knight is in love with the queen and has been meeting with her secretly, Arthur's evil son Mordred coaxes him into sentencing Guinevere to death, the punishment for adultery. Lancelot saves the queen at the last moment and flees with her to his castle in Wales. Arthur and his men lay siege to the castle for months. Finally, Lancelot emerges with his knights to do battle, but he refuses and forbids his men to harm the king. Arthur too cannot bring himself to attack Lancelot as the two armies fight. The conflict instead ends in an agreement that Lancelot will return the queen and travel to France in exile. Yet since the status quo must be altered by a heroic conflict, forces near the king urge him to follow Lancelot back to France and complete his revenge. Arthur leaves Mordred on the throne in his absence, and the downfall of his kingdom begins in earnest. Here for a third time we find two great names or sides in mythology resorting to fight each other over the letter versus the spirit of the law. The result is a major turning point and even downfall of the mythos. I could mention more examples, but you most likely see where I'm heading. When Marvel's editors decided to shake up their universe with an inner conflict between heroes, they approached the event in a mythological way. Like the examples from history we just covered, Marvel allowed the conflict to rise organically from these characters' development and the natural tensions that would arise between them in their world. Tony Stark already has a built-in sensitivity over his past actions, and is eager to atone and assuage his guilt. His origin transformation from weapons manufacturer to the superhero Iron Man reflects that motivation. Having him bear the brunt of guilt for the actions of a young and untrained superhero team is hardly a stretch. When he becomes the figurehead of the Superhero Registration Act, he falls in with the form of civilization that lacks substance. Like Gilgamesh, Mycenaean Greece, or King Arthur, Tony and many of the heroes siding with him are driven by emotion, well-intended as it is, rather than forethought. In their case, they feel an immediate desire for atonement and security. Captain America, then, is our Indicu, Troy, or Lancelot, in that he sees the spirit of the law over the letter. Having his origin in World War II, he remembers the fascism that came from a people turning over too many of their rights for the sake of security. It doesn't matter to him if a king or government is lawful in doing a thing. He's concerned rather with the long-term implications and whether the thing they want to do should in fact be lawful in the first place. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has both of these core character motivations already in place. Even for other characters in both the comic and film, like Spider-Man, a character younger than his heroes finding it difficult to choose among them. And like the comics, the cinematic universe is poised for this turning point within its themes and character arcs. In the comics, the events of Civil War led to the assassination of Captain America, and the nation was left reeling and questioning its new direction, grieving for its lost spirit and the indirect role it played in his end. Whether Cap dies in the film or not, we know that the events are a game-changing lead-in to Infinity War and Phase 3. Civil War resonated deeply in the comics, as will the upcoming film, not because of brilliant writing, art, or orchestration, but because it tapped into a deeper human story we've been telling ourselves about our heroes as far back as recorded history. And stories about our heroes are really stories about ourselves. So stay tuned for part 2 of this 3-part series in which we'll explore Civil War in the comics and film as a reflection of our own political and philosophical conflicts then and now. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.